back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and today we are doing another top 10 here on the channel. This time we're doing the top 10 solo games outside the spotlight, and I think this is going to be a really cool list. I'll talk to you about how I kind of, what the criteria was essentially to put this list together in a second. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that these lists have been a blast to put together. I forgot how much fun it is to go through the comments of a list video and see all the people in the community that I typically see commenting on my playthroughs and everything else, kind of listing out either saying essentially during the list videos that they line up with my interests, that they semi line up with my interests, or they completely don't. And then seeing their versions of the list on their side. Like, I think that's some of the most fun things to kind of see it of a top 10 is the community feedback coming back. That's the coolest part for me, and being able to actually have those conversations with people. So on every single top 10 I've done prior, every time someone comments, I always make sure to respond. So and I do that across all of my comments on YouTube in general. So anything that comes through, I always try to respond as quick as I possibly can. And I love that conversation, that back and forth. And these videos definitely foster that pretty nicely. So we're going to continue doing it as long as it's fun, as long as I'm enjoying it, as long as you're enjoying it, we're going to keep doing it. So this one being the top 10 solo games outside of the spotlight, what I wanted to do, I mean, really, if you took this from a generic level, you'd sit there and say, well, that could be basically anything that came out 3 years ago and prior, because it's, if you're not in the hotness, you're not in the spotlight. There you go. There's your list. That's probably 95% of board games right now, maybe more than that. And I could just put them in lists ranked based on some generic ranking. But what I wanted to do with this list to make it a little bit more exciting was I wanted to exclude games that are already highly recommended. Now, it's not to say that some of these games aren't recommended highly or aren't recommended at all, but they aren't like part of the typical top recommendations you're going to see all the time these days. So these games, the oldest one on the list in terms of when it originally released, because some of them actually had some revisions or second editions, the original release of all these games was at least 2018 or older. So you're not going to see anything that would be a game that you would expect to see in the hotness list right now, or anything being talked about wildly. These games had their time in the sun at one point, and they've shifted away now. It doesn't mean that they're not good games. Doesn't mean that they don't deserve the spotlight. It just means they've already had it, and now focus is elsewhere. So hopefully this list will kind of allow people that are either new to the hobby coming in going, what games are currently available? What can I hunt down that's good? These will kind of open up a number of options for people that maybe didn't get a chance to experience them when they first came out. And then some people are going to sit there and say, well, I've experienced that one before and I actually either tossed it, I didn't like it, or I actually still have it, I love it. Regardless, this list should hopefully be good for people that are experienced solo players or new to the hobby. And that's kind of the aim of this list. Now, at some point in time, I am going to do my top 10 hidden gem solo games, and that'll be a completely different list. And that's where I'm just going to go looking for games and showing you guys games that I think are completely under the radar and deserve more praise and more attention. This list is more so just games that I think are solid, that no longer are recommended highly amongst groups as much. And I think there might be one on the list that probably shouldn't be there, but I let it slide and I put it in because I don't hear it being recommended all the time. But I know that a lot of people think of it as like a classic solo game at this point. And I'll mention that when I actually get to it. So without further ado, this ridiculously long intro, let's get into the very first one, which is the number 10. Number 10 on my list belongs to Deep Madness from Dimension Games. This is actually one that is currently, if I'm not mistaken, it's in a reprint situation right now and a second edition, I think. It's still currently outstanding in terms of delivery, but they will deliver it because this game had delivered in the past back in 2018. I actually did videos on it, covered it, and I really enjoyed it. Now, I don't have it anymore because I played it a whole bunch back then and got what I wanted out of it. And it actually waits on the more complex side of the equation, actually. And the funny thing is about that, and the reason I even mentioned that, is because this game probably closely ties in terms of what it does to Zombicide, but don't let that deter you. There's probably a lot of people that are like, oh my gosh, Zombicide, get this thing out of here. I only say that from the standpoint of you're kind of going on these missions inside the game, and it's got that vibe in terms of miniatures on the board. You're controlling a crew, you're moving around. What I'm going to tell you about this game that, and where it differs from Zombicide is it's far tougher. It's far more strategic. There's far more wrenches being thrown at you as you go along. So with Zombicide, you can kind of plan your steps ahead and you can kind of know, like, I need to get to X location by this time frame. And you can feel generally okay so long as one card flip doesn't screw you, that you can pull that off. it's not as tense as this is. This is going to throw you things during gameplay that you're not going to be able to see coming. And the monsters are so varied and different that they're going to present their own challenges based on which ones come out beyond the amount that are inside of a typical Zombicide base game or something like that. So this one has like a whole bunch of enemies you can add into the equation, and they're wild. I remember playing this on camera, and I remember having, a full strategy, like, oh yeah, this will be doable, totally can do this. You're going to have to make, point in time decisions, and some of those decisions you're going to instantly regret. Like, you're going to do it, you're going to start going down a corridor, you're going to be like, we're going for this objective, we're going to try to accomplish this, and then you're like, nope, we are not, we're doing plan B. And that's those kind of fun decisions, and also trying to keep your entire crew alive and everything else. Like, I had a lot of fun with this one, even though I don't have it anymore. I actually regret inside not having it anymore, because I really think that they did a great job kind of taking what Zombicide did so well and ramping it up to a level that's almost like, this to me is more of a meaty game. And the other cool thing for people that don't know, this one actually has a series of books tied to it as well. So if you really want to immerse yourself into the whole story, theme, all that kind of stuff as a solo gamer, read some books for this one and then get the game. It will kind of drive you even further into the experience. Number 9 on my list is Leaving Earth. This comes from the Luminaris group, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a solid solo experience. It actually kind of tips itself towards the heavier side of the equation. Most individuals will have probably seen this on the shelf at their friendly local game store, maybe passed by it. Maybe it didn't, grip you in terms of its cover artwork and things like that. But I can tell you right now from a solo experience, this is one that you should really look into, especially if you're into this type of situation. This game, as it mentions right here, it's all about planning and managing risk. So it's very much all about being efficient. You're going to be planning to try to beat other nations to get to space, and you're trying to do this in the most efficient way possible. So it mentions right here, find the cheapest, quickest, safest way to your objective. If you take a look at the components are very nice. It's a solid in terms of component quality in the cards. I mean, it's mainly a card game. So the components don't vary too much overall, but they're nice and they're well designed. And there's also, I believe, there's some really nice inserts that you can pick up actually for this one. I think there's some that are just pure wood as well. I know that the actual boxes themselves, you can see here, have like a wooden case around them. So I remember the first time that I ran into this actually in my friendly local game store, which I believe no longer exists, or it's shifted to a different situation. But at that time I walked in, I kind of was like, oh, that's an interesting box. That's kind of looking cool. And I passed by it, I think like 8 or 10 times. And then one day I just actually picked up, bought it and played it. And I was like, wow, this thing is really good. Now I feel kind of bad because I never actually created any content on it, but you'll notice here, it is best played solo. So, I mean, this is a solid one. It came out in 2015, so it's getting up there in age. Like, it's been around for a while. There's also, as you probably saw in some of the pictures, there's been some expansions that have come out over time to kind of bolster the experience. But I mean, I got a funny feeling that there's going to be some of you individuals watching this that are going to go, interesting. I kind of want to check this one out, and I recommend that you do. In the number 8 position, we have Gloom of Kilforth, a fantasy quest game. This comes from Tristan Hull and Hull or Nothing Productions. This one, you guys are going to remember. If you've been around on the channel since the very beginning, this was one of the first playthroughs that I actually did, and man, did I ever have fun. I still have this game. It's sitting down there. You can see it at the very bottom. I've also got the other iterations of this game because there's been more of them that have come out, but we're going to talk about the original that kind of started it all. Now, Hull or Nothing Productions also has other games that are kind of a historical kind of angle, and this one's obviously on the fantasy side of the equation, so nothing about this is historically accurate whatsoever. But one thing that is absolutely amazing in this one, and I think this is what gravitated me towards this project when it first was coming out, was how much effort Tristan had put into this over the years to build this game. And then on top of it, how absolutely gorgeous the artwork was. It was ridiculous. In terms of taking other card games at that time and putting them side by side, and even still today, take another card game and put it up to this artwork, like this, the quality of this stuff is nuts. It's just the artwork bounces right off the card. You can't help but get immersed completely in the experience just based on the artwork alone. And so that kind of is what drove me to try it, was the artwork. And then once I tried it, I realized, oh my gosh, like this game's really good. And then on top of it, as you can see here on Board Game Geek, it's the best way to play the game. And I 100% agree with that. You want to be in full control when you're actually doing this. I'll show you some more pictures of it on the table in terms of how it's set up, but I'm hoping I can find one that gives it or does it justice, because photos don't do these cards justice. You have to see them up close. This is essentially the layout. I mean, I won't focus too much on trying to find one that's up close and personal, but you can see every single area of this world is kind of set out in a grid pattern form, and you have all of these different locations with beautiful artwork on them. But as the gloom encroaches on all these areas, these cards flip over and they go kind of grayscale, black and white, and so you start losing the vibrancy of the colors on the actual environment, which just plays right into the theme and the immersion factor of the game. And I just love this thing. This is one of those games that's in my collection. It's not going anywhere. I'm never going to sell this thing. I have too many good memories with it. And it would be a lot of fun to actually revisit it on the channel, but I highly recommend, if you skipped over this, didn't even hear about it, don't know about it, this is one that can fly right under the radar quite easily. Definitely recommend checking this out. In the number 7 position of solo games that are outside the spotlight, we got Fireteam Zero. This one came out in 2015. Definitely deserves to be on this list. So again, these are games so far. Hopefully you're seeing a number of games that have kind of, you probably have likely heard of these, but they're no longer really being talked about. Like Deep Madness has kind of gone under the radar, unless you're part of maybe the reprint campaign, then you're kind of very excited for what's coming out with that. The other ones on the list were Leaving Earth, Gloom of Kilforth. Like, these are games that have been around for quite some time, and they've kind of shuffled their way behind a number of other new releases. So I'm just trying to kind of bring some more exposure to these games, and Fireteam Zero was definitely one of them. I loved the World War II soldiers and the horror mix. I thought that the storyline of that was just so cool. And the other thing that made this game pop out even more for me was the fact that you could actually read some novels that would even fill in more of the story around this game, which really sucks you into the experience. So I'm going to go ahead here and show you some looks on the table in terms of how it looks and feels. But it looks in this picture to be quite simplistic in terms of what's set up. You're actually able to set up this game quite easily. I can say that for sure. There's a lot of cards with it, but in terms of the mix of different items and things in modules you can kind of add into the game experience, it's really cool. I'll try to find a better picture of... Now, I think it's a little bit interesting because I'm seeing that the miniatures are white, but the ones that I actually had when I had the game, because I played it from start to finish and completed every single thing in it, they were kind of grayscale. That was, I believe, the original. So when I saw the white there earlier, I was kind of like, oh, maybe that was what they did with the reprint. I'm not too sure. But yeah, this just brings back a ton of memories. And again, just like I said earlier with Deep Madness, Gloom of Kilforth, Fireteam Zero, I have videos for all of these on the channel. So if you want to see how these actually operate, you don't have to look any further. I've got you covered. Here's a better picture of things. So you can see the cards are usually set up around the game board. You've kind of got like a dashboard up here, which is keeping track of the game overall and stuff like that, and the rounds you're going through. The dice are nice and meaty and thick. There's lots of icons across them. It's a dice checker in that way. Like, it has that element, but it also has really cool card play. So it has a nice balance of dice and cards, and that kind of keeps the whole experience very interesting, and the tension is always there. That's something I really liked about this one too, was the tension factor, the feeling of kind of like being under the gun. And then the actual little booklets that come in terms of the narrative and everything else with the game, that was really well tied into the experience. It really helped to kind of set the stage like you would typically in a World War II setting, where you're kind of saying, okay, well, what's my mission? What am I doing? That's what those booklets were all about, and kind of driving the experience home. But the vibe of this was 100%. Loved it. Like I said, played it A to Z, and then I ended up selling it off because I had already experienced the entire thing, but I definitely recommend, if you haven't tried it, to give it a shot. In the number 6 position, this is Nemo's War, 2nd edition. That's right. This time we're focused on the 2nd edition because I truly believe that the 2nd edition is far better than the 1st edition. It is still old. It's been around since 2017. This is one that I was hesitant to put on the list because Nemo's War is recommended, and you do see this recommended at times, and sometimes heavily in certain requests on Facebook and different areas where people are saying, well, what solo games are great, right? Like, this is one that's kind of falling into it doesn't kind of fall into, it is in the classic solo game category with things like Eldritch Horror and just games that people recommend all the time. But this is one, to me, that I still think can fall under the radar. It can still be missed by new individuals coming into the hobby. So I kind of wanted to point people to this one. It's from Victory Point Games. And this one, like, a majority of these are beyond mid-weight complexity. And I like that because they're not simple, but they're not overly complex. They're like in that perfect window. So kind of a fun spot to be. In terms of what this thing looks like on the table, it doesn't take up an obscene amount of space, which is nice. But I mean, if you know anything about Nemo's War and things like that, you're going to be going around. There's a lot of the battling going on and stuff like that. There's a lot of sub movement, but there's also kind of I think the only con to this one could be that when you first look at it, you might feel a little bit overwhelmed if you're not, into this style of presentation, I want to say. But I think if you just take a look through the rule book, read it, you're going to get sucked right in, because the idea of just going around taking down ships and everything else, it becomes addicting really fast. And you're going to have a blast doing that, like ripping around in your submarine and causing mayhem. That's good. And then also, of course, trying to keep your sub from basically taking all this damage. You've got like the crew, the hull, and everything else. You got to kind of keep those things in check. This is a really good simulation of that whole experience. I just love the way it's presented, the way it looks, the way it plays. It's one that's just a gem. So this one, and it's highly thematic. You can see it's 45. So I mean, this is one of the ones, as I mentioned, this is the one I was like, oh, I probably shouldn't put this on the list. Probably should be something else, but it is what it is. And then on top of it, it literally is the best way to play solo is this one. You should not play this game with other people. This is a game that needs to be played only solo. So for that reason, on top of everything else, I said, well, let's put it on this list, because I think if you've missed it, you're missing out. We've now hit into top 5 territory, and the 5th position belongs to Apex Theropod deck building game, the Collected Edition. I recommend, out of the editions that are available, and there is one that was actually prior to this, I definitely recommend that one because of the fact that the Collected Edition is just a much better, more encompassing game than the original one was, and kind of has more going for it. Won't get into the details of that, but just go after that one if you're looking for it. It is the best way to play solo. There's not a ton of votes here, so that could be swayed a little bit, but I would say that this is absolutely a game that you can play solo and dig into. If you like deck building games, and of course, like the weight of this one compared to some of the other ones you've already seen in this list, a little bit more on the easier to learn side of the equation, but the theme and the artwork of this one will, I mean, you don't even have to be that into dinosaurs. That's the thing. There's going to be some people that are going to sit there and say, well, dinosaurs, I kind of got over that when I was younger. I'm not really, into it. That's what I thought until I played it. And then I was like, wait a minute, dinosaurs are amazing. It's awesome. This game is so much fun. And building yourself up and deck building to a point where you can try to take down one of these monstrosities and stuff like that is so satisfying. And even when you get taken out by one of them, that's also satisfying too, because it makes you want to kind of come back, try different strategies. You can kind of, you pick a deck, work it through, give it a shot against one of the larger enemies, and then try to pull it off again. It's just, you get into a gameplay loop with this one where once it gets on your table, it's hard to take off, because you'll play a game, and whether you win or lose, you kind of want to retry again almost right away. And that's why this one, and it's actually doesn't show in my collection, but it is in my collection, so I should actually update that. And that's one thing to mention too. I'm really poor at actually updating my BGG collection in terms of its actual status, but I do have this. It's actually sitting right there. It's just, I think it actually cuts off, but it's on the far end of that shelf, so it's just at a screen view. Long story short, if you are looking for a deck building game and you don't know what to pick, go after this one. My number 4 solo game outside the spotlight is The Reckoners from Navu Games. You might be wondering, wow, your hair has decreased a little bit, you've changed your clothing, and also it appears like a different time of day. All those things are correct. I actually realized while I was editing this top 10 list, it only actually filmed 9 games. That would have been pretty funny if I had to release that, because I would have said top 10 and it would have been top 9. I'm sure the comments would have been full of all kinds of kind of comical responses to that, but I was able to catch it in time, so you're going to see this jarring entry for game number 4 being very different than anything else on the list, but we can still continue onwards as I caught it just before going ahead to get this thing published and out the door, so that's a good thing. All right, so Reckoners. This is a great game. I actually got introduced to this one at Gen Con, because last time I went to Gen Con was 2018, and that's when the Reckoners came out. I actually was able to play this for the very first time with my uncle, Rodney Smith. It was a lot of fun having him teach the game amongst a number of other content creators that happened to be in the same room at the same time. That was a lot of fun to rip through together, try to survive. This one is going to be, actually, I'll go back to the description for this one. In terms of weight, though, this is really nice. It kind of sits very much in the middle. It's not going to take you a long time to play, especially if you're playing solo. And it's based on a bunch of young adult fantasy novels. It's obviously got that superhero vibe. And there's a lot of people that are going to be very familiar with this individual, Brandon Sanderson, who put together all these novels. And that's what this game is based off of. You have Steelheart, who is the main villain. And the purpose of this one is you're trying to weaken Steelheart in order to take him down. And of course, he's messing with the city in itself. He's trying to reduce the population, and there's ways in which you can lose the game, but the overall goal here is to weaken things down to a point where you can take Steelheart out. I will go ahead and show you some images on this one because I really think this is a unique one that was very, very popular when it first came out, and then very quickly just kind of like coasted right under the radar now. Like I very rarely see this thing mentioned in recommendation lists, but I still think it's awesome. Also, in terms of presentation and production, this thing's off the charts. It's got very nice components, and it also has a very nice setup, aesthetic look on the table. It catches your eye. It's got these awesome trays. Everything's tracked with cubes. You've got individual trackers for stuff. Oh, it's so good. And actually, just looking through these pictures reminds me of how much fun I had with this. But essentially, you kind of have the city set up in the center of the board, kind of in a circle pattern, kind of thinking like Marvel United in terms of how it's kind of arranged in a circular pattern. And you're working your way around the city, dealing with all the fun that's being thrown, those different areas and stuff like that, taking out all the different henchmen and trying to work your way down to taking out Steelheart. But your characters are very much unique. So you have different characters that are basically going to serve certain purposes and be better with certain dice than others. And those are going to kind of lend themselves into the strategy of how you're going to be able to take this puzzle down, because every time you play it, the puzzle kind of tweaks and changes based on who you're going up against and how it's all panning out. So you can't just go into this with the same approach every single time, because everything you change in terms of the setup could potentially change how the outcome of the game ends up panning out. This is a really fun one to play solo. It's a great one-shot type situation. You're looking for a game to get to the table that I think you'll have a lot of fun with, that maybe got overlooked quite quickly after it came out. This is one to certainly dig into, and it has, like I said, a very nice production overall, and thematically definitely way up there. And overall, I'm actually kind of surprised it sits as far back at 1,000 and above as it does, because I really do think that this really should be an 8. It should be an 8. Because I believe it's really that fun. And also, they have an expansion for it as well, which I did pick up too. And this one I haven't dug into, but this shot it even further. And you can see now it's kind of heading up, in terms of the expansion at least, into the 8.4 category. So a lot of people are really impressed with what this one added into the fray. And of course, it just bolsters the whole experience, adding more variability into it and everything else. So lots to dig into with this one. If you've missed it, check it out. We've now made it to top 3 territories in terms of games that are outside the spotlight, and I absolutely think this one for sure is arguably either in the 3rd position, as it is here on my list, or could potentially even be in the 1st position. This is a gem of a solo game experience. And if you are an individual that's looking at this one, I think the one thing that deters people almost immediately sometimes, and it did to me the first time I saw it, is just the color. The presentation of the game board can be a little bit kind of jarring in terms of the colors. But then if you really just sit there and go, well, this is unique, I don't have anything like this from an artwork standpoint, then all of a sudden it becomes cool. It goes from being kind of crazy wild and you think your eyes are going to bleed to like, no, this is actually awesome. I really like this. It kind of gives a whole different vibe. And there's actually logic behind the color scheme and everything else, in terms of different areas of the map are broken out based on their color scheme, which makes it even easier to kind of see which areas things are slotted into. But this is one that is going to not only set up situations that you're going to laugh at, it has an edginess to it. You're going to see that as you go through the cards. I'll try to show you a couple right here. You can see some of the names, some of these individuals. Like it takes itself seriously, but then it doesn't take itself seriously. And it probably leans more towards doesn't take itself seriously. But the gameplay is great. So what ends up happening is you get this weird mix of like funny things that end up occurring as you journey through this game. I think that's the best part about it. It's kind of got that sandbox style approach to kind of exploring things. I've had situations that are just absolutely ridiculous that I can't even put them into words as to how they panned out the way they did, but they just made me laugh. And that's the kind of stuff you're going to run into with this one. It's an experience that you're going to enjoy. And I think a game that takes you down a road that's, like I said, just a little bit off its rocker is kind of something you almost need in your collection, because so many games are kind of like, straight line, just, exactly what you'd expect and stuff like that. This one gives that edginess that I think makes it unique to anything else out there. So if you don't have this, and I do, so I'm going to update my list here. It's also on this shelf. I think it's actually behind one of the front here, but this is an awesome one. And actually, I think I went out and I shouldn't say I think I did. I went out and got and put a video together for a storage insert for this one, which I think is phenomenal. I definitely recommend that. Go check that video. But I haven't actually covered this one on the channel yet, so I do apologize for that. I think, taking a look through my list of games here, there might be a few. There might be a few of these that I haven't actually covered on the channel. So this should actually be quite interesting for individuals going through this list, because you're going to see some things that I haven't actually covered, which should hopefully put on your radar. And I hope you put Dungeon Degenerates on your radar. My number 2 solo game outside the spotlight is Folklore the Affliction from Greenbrier Games. If you were to go into any group, any setting of people, any kind of social media situation and said, hey, I'm looking for a game that has immersion, has great storytelling, it's an adventure game, typically Folklore will get recommended in amongst a whole bunch of, I mean, that's a pretty wide range. You're going to get a lot of suggestions in there, but Folklore has trailed off in recent years. It's not being recommended as much, and I think that does a disservice to this one, because I really think that this one is one of the best experiences from the time frame that it was originally released. And it came out in 2017. It was rated at 7.7, which is very good. And weight-wise, again, this is kind of teetering towards the more complex side of the equation. But if you take a look at what it actually offers in terms of an experience, and I mentioned this before in a different top 10, that the fact that these things have there's a huge map, or neoprene map for this, but I really like the fact that everything is paper thin. And they do this on purpose. It's high quality, very high gloss, colorful, vibrant, and everything else. So it doesn't feel cheap in terms of, you know, the areas, but everything is easy. Like if you need to set up a dungeon that you're now exploring, it's just, you put that there and you're done. And so that allows you to kind of have a lot of different areas and different environments within one box. There's lots of minis with this one. It looks really, really good on the table, and it has a lot of content. So you can deep dive into this one and get lost in the game world. For me, this one absolutely deserves to be on the list. And there's gonna be some people that'll say, well, that's a pretty well-known one. It's not surprising, but there's gonna be a bunch of people that are never going to hear about this one, or going to hop straight over it. And I'm hoping that this list will kind of identify the fact that I think this one is still to this day a staple of a game that needs to be recommended and played and showcased more often. And this is one actually I would love to get to the channel at some point and show you guys where it's at currently. But for now, it sits as number 2, and I would highly recommend it if you want to get into a solo game adventure that's going to suck you away into gothic horror like nothing else out there. My number 1 solo game outside the spotlight at this point in time is Shadows of Brimstone, The City of Ancients. This is a co-op dungeon crawler. It's a monster-ridden Old West, so you're going to have that H.P. Lovecraft vibe with Western. This one I actually mentioned on a previous top 10, although I don't know what position it was in. It was not in the first position, but on this list it is. This has been around for a long time, and it definitely has faded from conversations. I mean, it's still mentioned, similar to Folklore the Affliction. It's mentioned here and there, but it's not like, there's not a ton of people talking about it. But this is a solid game. It came out in 2014. It's been re-implemented in 2020 and got even better because they fixed some of the wording on the cards. They made the miniatures even better. The quality of the sprues, everything jumped up, and it was awesome. That was a really nice thing for them to do, kind of go back and revise it. A lot of people like that. There's a ton of expansions for this. So the overall gist of this one is you're going to be going into a mine, and you're going to be going in as a posse of cowboys. You might have a gunslinger. And the coolest thing about this game is that every single character is truly unique. And it kind of has almost so this would have come out way before Massive Darkness 2 did. But when Massive Darkness 2 came out and kind of made every person of the party feel kind of unique with the ability to do, kind of have almost a little mini game within their character of how their character operates. That's essentially what's going on with the different character classes of Brimstone. Is you might have, a dude who is a gunslinger who's got like a literal gun, and he's putting the bullets into the gun and loading them, and then using the bullets out of this little gun to basically do or trigger different abilities or get bonuses and stuff like this. And he has to reload them. And it's just every single individual, whether it's the lawman, the gunslinger, the saloon girl, they all have different ways of interacting with the environment and stuff like that, and how they fight. And that makes it so much fun to play, because when you're going in with a posse of characters, it's not just generic, like, okay, it's not Zombicide level in terms of like everyone's got a pistol and we're just gonna roll dice. Everyone's got like a unique twist to their character. This is a dice chucker though, so if you are not a fan of chucking dice, you're gonna want to steer clear of this one. But I love dice chucking. I have nothing against it, and I actually find that for this one it lends itself perfectly to the whole situation, because a lot of what this game does is random, and that could make some people go, I don't like random. But there's a lot of strategy in there too. But the random nature, I think, makes the game more immersive because it fits the theme and it fits what you're doing so well. So I'll show you an example of like what this game looks like on the table when it's set up, because these are actually, well, here, first let's talk about this because I found a good picture of a portal. But basically, you will find, spots in the game where you're going to go through a portal. And as you can see here, this is a regular mine spot. This is actually perfect. This is nuts. So this person basically started their campaign out. They walked into the mine, and that the mine is the main thing you're going into and trying to, win that scenario in a mine because it's a Western. But there are these portals and they can show up. And they'll show up randomly. And if you decide to go through them, and in this case, he didn't have a chance. And this is where it's fun. The randomness makes this entertaining because it could happen on the first tile that you get a portal and you don't have a choice. You have to go through, like, you're going to go through the portal now and just continue on here. You can find portals in the portals in the mine that can take you to another world. Then you can find portals in the other worlds that can take you to other worlds. So you can literally be hopping around between multiple different places based on how many expansions you have. So if you only have maybe the 2 core box experiences, I believe you have 2 other worlds that you can go to. But the more expansions you add in, more other worlds start going in the pile. And eventually your deck becomes thick and you've got a whole bunch. And when you flip a card over, that's where you're going to go when you go through the portal. It's so cool. And on top of it, it's not just about changing the terrain. When you go into that new location or area, the whole theme changes, which means cards shift. You now use decks that are specific to that area, which means you find gear from that area you can't find anywhere else. You start fighting enemies that are specifically designed for that area. And of course, they're going to have, it's their home turf. So you're coming in trying to fight enemies that are probably well prepared. Whereas you're coming in with whatever weapons and things you found in previous other worlds, bringing them in. Like, it's the dynamics between the different things going on this one is just, it's like a theme park. That's the best way to describe Shadows of Brimstone. It is literally a theme park to the highest degree, and it is a blast. I love it. I absolutely love it. And at some point in time, I'm going to take you guys through the hex crawl situation, which is underneath of the City of Ancients. It's not, you can't find this one if you look up the swamps, which is the other core box. And there's actually Forbidden Fortress is another core box. They've actually come up with a few. The hex crawl is only listed underneath City of Ancients. I recommend you checking it out, but check it out from a high level. Don't look at it in the sense of trying to add everything that it does into your equation, because it's a lot. You can kind of go down almost an RPG road with this unofficial variant. But what I would do is grab the overland map, and then if you go inside of this one and you check out the actual document behind this one, there is a document that will let you know exactly how you can do something called, I believe it's either the Mine Blast or the Mine Buster. And it uses the overland map, and it gives you some rules that you can follow to kind of move your posse around on the map. But it doesn't necessarily force you into anything that that's going to be long-winded in terms of the in between. So let me show you what the map looks like, for example. So this is essentially what the map looks like, and it's got all these hexes. And you'll have like multiple different cities in these red areas here, right? So as you're moving your posse between the different hexes, you're going to run into a certain city. And you're going to do what you do in Shadows of Brimstone, which is you typically roll on a chart to determine what it is you found. So you roll on a chart, and if you have the town expansion, then you have a whole bunch of charts in front of you, maybe 10 or 12 of them, different types of towns. So you roll a die, it tells you what type of town it is. Maybe this one that we just visited is a deserted town. So there's nobody there. It's completely deserted. Maybe there's only one person there or whatever. Like, it's very thin, but you have a full sheet from the town expansion that explains what goes on there, what you can do there. Very cool. And so what ends up happening is you start writing down, okay, so that particular town, which is town number 6, is this type of town. Then you go to the next town. You're like, okay, next we visited this town, recoup some supplies and get ready for the next mine. Maybe they're maybe it's an industrial town. Maybe they're very much building things, and there's tons of different stores, and there's a saloon, and there's different areas to visit. There's gambling and all that kind of stuff. So some of these towns will be useful, and some of them are going to be useless, and some of them will be in between. But long story short, you're going to be walking around because you're going to be trying to replenish your party that you're bringing with you and stuff like that, or posse, I guess, in this case. But the one thing to focus on is all these mines. You've got all these mines all over the place. In order to win the Mine Buster or Mine Blast campaign, the idea is that, out of all of these mines, you have to seal a certain number of them. So let's say you have to seal 8. I don't know how many there actually are, but it looks like there's way more than 8. You have to seal at least 8, let's say, to win the campaign. But if you let 8 of them overrun, you fail the campaign. So if you head into, say you're sitting here, you know this is a deserted town, you know you've got what you've got out of it, which is maybe not much. You head into the very first one, you decide to move some hexes here, roll some dice for any encounters you might run into, and then you jump into this mine. You go to the core box, you look at all the missions that are presented in the core box, you pick one of the scenarios, almost like you're playing a one-off, and you play that. The goal is to win the scenario. If you win the scenario, you essentially seal the mine. It's like having dynamite and blowing the mine up. You've sealed the darkness in, it can't get out, and it doesn't impact you in a negative way, and you're one step closer to winning your campaign. Now, if you fail the one-off scenario, then what ends up happening is, in essence, thematically, the monsters have spewed out of the area because you were driven out. You guys like retreat. You failed, so you run out of the mine. But now all the monsters that are coming out of the mine are coming out into the real world. So they come out, they spill out, and they head to the nearest town, and they destroy it. So then you have to put a skull token on top of this. I believe it's a skull or some kind of, it's a skull token. It just lets you know that town is now inaccessible. It's useless. It's gone. And of course, if you lose too many towns, the idea behind the campaign is that they've overrun the area and now there's too much evil in the world essentially to even comprehend. So your campaign's a failure. So it kind of it's not introducing like crazy complex stuff, but it takes what the core game does, which is all about single one-shot scenarios, and it just ties a nice, quick little campaign you can kind of do into an experience that can be a lot of fun, because seeing seeing a town you really love that has all this stuff that you can gain right down here when you're trying to work through these specific mines, and then all of a sudden you fail one and it gets overrun, forces you to then go, okay, we need to go head to the next town to find out, is this town going to have something useful? And you go there and you roll a die and you get a chart and you find out, and the whole thing of rolling dice doesn't become a negative with this game for me. It becomes a positive because it's all part of exploration. The fact that the actual dungeon, even in the same way that you'd roll a dice to kind of figure out what a town might be, you might be moving through the dungeon itself, and you don't get to see the structure of the dungeon. Like, you don't know how that dungeon is structurally built. You start like this. You are literally a couple characters at the very first tile, and as you move into the next tile, once you move off this one, you got to draw a card from the top of a deck, which will tell you, it's a map deck, it'll tell you what tile goes there. So you have, like, every time you play the game, it is going to be structurally different in terms of the layout of the mine. You never know where a portal's going to show up that's going to whisk you off to a completely different area, like Japan or space or any of the themed expansions that you picked up. So that's wild. And there's all kinds of gear and enemies that are specific to those areas, and they're all equipped and ready for you to come in there because they really want to hurt you when you land. And some of them even, like, there's a World War II one there. It's like so many good ones. And then, of course, there's other portals that'll show up inside those other worlds to take you to other worlds. Like, it kind of like, and then you can obviously come back through and go back out the entrance or whatever. But it's like, it's nuts. It's nuts. It's like, it is a theme park for sure. So this one I recommend all the time because some of my best memories are playing this game solo, playing it with other people as well. I've had fun with this one no matter how I've enjoyed it. And actually my rating here of 8.5 is probably pretty accurate. I might even tip it to a 9 at this point because it's special enough to me that I would never let it go. And I would be willing at any point in time to drop what I'm doing to play it. And that, my friends, is my top 10 solo games outside the spotlight. I really hope you found something of interest throughout this list and maybe even brought back some memories for some of the games that maybe you've played prior. Some of these games might be sitting on your shelf and you've already played them in the past. You're kind of going, I should actually pull that out and play it again. It was a lot of fun back then. And some of you guys might have sold some of them and are kind of going, I regret it. I might want to go find it again. Or maybe you'll look at the list and going, there's nothing here. Regardless, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear either your list first off, because I think that would be the coolest thing. If we can get a whole bunch of people commenting on what your list is, doesn't have to be 10. It could be just 5. That's fine too. Even if it's 3 or 1, whatever, just throw those game names in there because that can really help out other people that are kind of searching around for games that don't get the spotlight these days. Typically, the focus is on games that have come out in the last 2 to 3 years, and even on the outskirts of 2 to 3 years, they're typically falling off the map. Usually, it's within like 1 year, based on just how this hobby kind of progresses forward so fast. And speaking of games that are very recent and popular, Aeon Trespass Odyssey is a game I've actually recently covered on the channel as well. So if you're interested, and it is on crowdfunding right now, and you want to check out some gameplay to actually make an informed decision on whether or not the game's for you, I covered the whole Learn to Play booklet for you guys to kind of give you an idea as to how it flows and operates. And of course, the game layers on things beyond just Learn to Play once you get going, but that gives you the structure you need to understand the game flow and then get going from there. And of course, you get into spoiler territory if you go too much farther than Learn to Play. So I avoided that for now because of the fact this game is just getting out into the wild on a more rampant pace. And I also didn't want to spoil anything for the individuals that have the first printing like I do from the original campaign. So I kind of want to give people some time to digest what's there. And then what we'll do probably on the channel in the future is actually dig into something maybe a little further into Aeon Trespass Odyssey. We'll see how it goes. But there's a lot of games, even on this list, that I'm kind of sitting there going, man, I really need to get some of these games to the table and show you guys them because I haven't covered every single one of them, but I'd love to. And when I do that, I want to soak up a bunch of time and really put a quality effort in to give you guys some quality content. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoy the channel, enjoy this video, and have a good weekend, as this is Friday, and this is the last bit of videoing I'm doing for this week, and then I'm going to be spending some time with my kids and taking a break after getting through the showcase for Aeon Trespass Odyssey, which I had an absolute blast with. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.